welcome to the Canadian University Dubai studio. My name is Julie Beaton. I am a Canadian immigration lawyer, and I'm also an assistant professor here at the university. So today we're going to talk about Canadian study permits. I know now is the time that many students from all over the world are receiving their acceptances to Canadian universities. And the next step in that process is to apply for your Canadian study permit. So we're going to give you some tips and information about that, and then we'll get into the details. So before we get started, I just wanted to discuss a few events that are happening here at the university. The first thing that we're doing is we're starting a new program which we're going to be focusing on youth and leadership and education. So as a professor here at the university, I have been very impressed by the students here, about the youth leaders I'm meeting in the community. So we want to invite these people in and interview them, find out what inspires them, and also what they're doing next, and just get this information out to the community. So if you're interested in these events, please like our Facebook page, and we will give you notification about these events in the future. Or if you're someone that is a youth leader or doing something inspiring in the UAE, please get in touch, and we'd love to interview you. As well, the first session that we're going to do on this is actually going to be on the 4th of June. So that is next week. We're going to introduce the new Bachelor of Psychology program here at CUD. So we're going to have the head of the program, Dr. Stefan Kabin, with us, who is a psychologist, and he'll be talking about his background and the new program. And we're also very excited to have a guest, a very prominent Emirati psychologist. Her name is Dr. Sultana Suleiman, who's going to be here with us. We're going to find out about her background and her background in psychology. So please join us. That's the 4th of June at 2 p.m. Also, I'll be doing more live updates about Canadian immigration, study permits, everything to do with immigrating to Canada. As many of you may know, CUD has a program here where you can transfer to one of our partner universities in Canada. So we have about 17 partners at very big established universities in Canada where you can do 1 or 2 years at CUD and then transfer to one of these universities. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later and give you some more details on that if you're interested. But that is why we also do a lot of immigration-based shows. One other thing to mark your calendar for is the 20th of June. We're going to have an open house here at the university. So come to the university, you can meet the professors, you can meet some of the other staff, you can find out about the Transfer to Canada program. I'll be there to answer questions about study permits or immigration. So please come along. It will be June the 20th from 4 to 8 p.m. Okay, so let's get started on study permits. So as I mentioned, this is the time that many students around the world are going to be receiving their letters of acceptance to Canadian universities. This includes our Canadian University Dubai students who will be transferring to universities in Canada. So this is not only information for them, but also students around the world who are in the same position. So at the end of this session, we're going to be doing a question and answer session. So if you have questions about Canadian immigration, study permits, Canadian University Dubai, please go ahead and put your comments on and we'll go through them. I'll answer as many questions as I can, and otherwise we will make sure that someone gets back to you with the information that you require. So with everything going on in the world, with Brexit in the UK and our friends in the South, Donald Trump, and also the tightening of immigration laws in Australia, it is very reassuring to know that the Canadian government is still very supportive of immigration. They've actually created a pathway that allows students who are studying in Canada to stay and work in Canada and then to also immigrate. So I'm going to go through all of those steps today. But it is great to see that the Canadian government still recognizes how important this is to the Canadian economy and to the country as a whole. So what I find for most of the clients that I work with, the reason why students want to go to Canada is, first of all, it's world-class education. The universities are ranked amongst the top in the world, and students are not going to give up an amazing education to go anywhere else. As well, there's also, it's a safe and welcoming place. With everything, as I mentioned, going on in other parts of the world, it's nice to know that you can go and feel very safe and welcome in Canada. One of the biggest things, though, is to have friendly immigration programs that allow you to stay and work and then to ultimately immigrate. The other thing to consider is that the tuition and living expenses are relatively less expensive in Canada than they are to the UK or to the US. So these are all the reasons that we find that students and parents are interested in having the students study in Canada. So for today's program, I'm going to assume that you have your acceptance letter already from a Canadian university. If you don't and you're wondering if you're eligible for a study permit, you can go to the website www.beatonco.com, and there's a free assessment to find out if you'd be eligible for this. We're also going to assume not only that you have your letter of acceptance, but also that that you're going to a university and not a college. There's 200 Canadian colleges that you can choose from if you are thinking about going to a college. But today, just for ease of going through all the details, we're going to assume you're going to an undergraduate program at a university in Canada. So a Canadian study permit is required for anyone that's going to be studying for over 6 months at a time. So if you're going to Canada, say for a language program, say to study English or to study French, that may be only 4 months long, then you don't necessarily need to have a Canadian study permit. But if you're going to an undergraduate program, you are going to need to have your study permit in place. The other thing to consider is that you need to be going to a designated learning institution. So this is a designation given by the Canadian government to certain universities and colleges in Canada that are allowed to invite international students to study at their institution. Most of the universities that are well known in Canada will all have this designation, and you can actually Google Designated Learning Institution Canada to find out which ones are accepted. But any of the partner universities for CUD would all have this designation. So how do you apply for a Canadian study permit? So you can actually apply online for your Canadian study permit. There is on the Canadian immigration website, all the facilities there are to submit your application. You can also do a paper application at the local visa office wherever you're located. If you're in the UAE, that's going to be in Wafi Mall, where you can go to VFS and submit your paper application. And you can also get assistance from either a Canadian immigration lawyer or a Canadian immigration consultant with your application. We work with a lot of students to help them with their study permit application, because what we find is on the IRCC website, sometimes there's just not enough information, or maybe too much information to kind of make sense if you're in a hurry and trying to get things done quickly. I find that the IRCC website sometimes doesn't specify exactly what is required in certain documents, so people are just looking for an extra hand to help them with the process. One thing to make sure is that when you submit your application, that it is full and complete. What happens with the application process for study permits is it's kind of a one-shot deal, in the sense that once it's submitted, the Canadian government will not come back to you and ask you for additional documents or for some additional information. They have to look at the application and everything has to be there. If it's not, they will be rejected. So if that's the case, you can still reapply, and we actually work with a lot of students on their reapplication. If they haven't been able to do it right the first time, then we'll help them on the second one to make sure that they get everything done on the second one perfectly before they send it in. So make sure, my advice, just make sure you have your application done well, and that everything's included before you submit it. So the benefits of having a study permit in Canada, the first thing is that you can actually work while you are studying. So you need to be in full-time studies in Canada, but you can also work part-time as pursuant to your study permit application. So what this means is you can work part-time either on or off campus, which helps balance the cost of studying in Canada. The other thing that you can also take part in is either an internship or a paid internship. A paid internship in Canada is called a co-op program, and many universities and colleges have this, and it's a great opportunity for people who are studying, where basically you would study for, say, 6 months, then you would go work in a company that's somehow related to your degree, and then go back and study for the rest of your degree. So you get Canadian work experience, you get paid while you're doing it, and you get exposure to the Canadian market. So they're great programs, so if you're looking for Canadian programs, it's something to consider. The other thing, if you're married, is that actually your spouse can come with you while you're studying. Your spouse will need to apply for an open work permit to allow them to study allow them to work while you are studying. So that's a really great opportunity for families. As well, in most provinces, if you have children, they can study for free at elementary and high school. You need to make sure which universities and cities that you're in to make sure that's available in those provinces, but in the majority that is the case. So it's, as I said, a great opportunity for families. The other thing to look at, and as I mentioned before, the Canadian government has created a pathway to allow students to stay in Canada, get Canadian work experience, and then ultimately immigrate. So after you complete your studies, you have 90 days to complete what's called a post-graduation work permit. This allows you to stay in Canada up to the time that you've studied. So if you did a 2-year degree, you could stay for 2 years in Canada and work and get some Canadian work experience. The maximum time for that visa is going to be 3 years. So if you did a 4-year degree, you could still get a maximum of 3 years for your work permit. But it's, again, a great way to stay in Canada and get Canadian work experience, whether or not you're thinking of immigrating to Canada permanently or just wanting to get some industry experience. So after all of this, then you're looking at permanent residency. And how this pathway works is that by having completed a Canadian degree, you get a significant increase in the number of Canadian immigration points when you go to apply for permanent residency. As well, by having Canadian work experience, you also get a large increase in the number of points that you would have for Canadian immigration when you apply for permanent residency. So it's a long-term plan. You complete your studies, you work in Canada, and then you apply for permanent residency. But ultimately, the pathway is there to allow you to become a permanent resident in Canada. So what do you need to complete, your study permit application? So the first thing, as I mentioned, is you need to have your acceptance letter. So you cannot do anything until you have your acceptance letter from a Canadian university or college. It can be a conditional letter of acceptance that you use, and many universities will provide this, a conditional letter of acceptance that requires you to then submit your marks. Even with a conditional letter, you can start the immigration process. Depending on where you're from, you may need to submit your biometrics. So say, for example, fingerprints. So you'll need to check, depending on your passport, what requirements are in place for biometrics. The last thing may be medicals. So if you're working with the elderly or with children in your degree, you may be required to do a medical for your study permit. It's not very common, but it is something to consider in case that it is something that you're studying. Otherwise, it's going to be the normal information that you would assume would be included in the application: your name, your birth date, your address, and sort of all your background information. So the two main things to really focus on when you're completing your study permit application is the ties to your home country and your proof of funds. These are the two main things that the Canadian government is going to look at in addition to all of your background information. So ties to your home country. Whatever your intentions are, so even if you're thinking down the road you want to immigrate to Canada and stay there permanently, when you're applying for a study permit, it is actually a temporary visa. So at the end of that, you need to show that if you cannot legally stay in Canada for whatever reason, so if the postgraduate permit does not come through, if your permanent residency doesn't come through, that you will leave and go back to your home country. And this may seem a bit counterintuitive because you ultimately want to immigrate to Canada, but at this point, what the Canadian government is really concerned is that people sort of stay there, rip up their passports, and never go home. So they want to show that you have a connection to your home country, that you will go back there if things don't work out in Canada to stay there permanently. So ways that you can establish this connection with your home country would include maybe you have property in your name in that country, you have loans or other financial commitments in your home country, maybe you have wedding plans and you're planning to go back to get married, or you have family commitments that you need to go back to. Other things, maybe your family has a business that they're running and you need to go back and assist with, or you get a job offer. All of these things are ways that you can show that you have a connection to your home country, and then if for whatever reason you cannot stay in Canada, you would go back to whatever your home country is. So that's one of the big things to focus on, and you need to really address this in your study permit application. The other thing to look at is proof of funds. So the Canadian government needs to be assured that you have the money to be able to support yourself, pay for your tuition, and pay for your living expenses. So you need to be able to show that you have your tuition expenses plus $10,000 Canadian for your first year to cover your living expenses. So ideally, this would be in a bank account in your name that you can show 4 months of bank statements for. If this is not the case, which for many students, they don't have that kind of cash in their bank account, they may be relying on their parents, you would then need to show proof of funds from the parents. So in that case, you would need to show, get a letter of support from your parents saying they're going to support you, also their bank statements. So it becomes a little bit more complicated and more documents are required. So that's the other thing. So proof of funds is a minimum of $10,000 Canadian if you're a single student, plus your tuition costs in order to prove that you have the funds to go to Canada. So just a couple of final tips to tell you about with respect to the study permit. An immigration officer cannot issue you a visa that is longer than your passport. So if your passport is going to expire soon, you should actually go and get it renewed before you start the study permit process to make sure you can get the full period of your studies on your study permit. The second thing to make sure is that there's actually blank pages in your passport, because you will actually have to put stamps and things in your passport. So if there's not enough blank pages, make sure again to go and renew it. Avoid last-minute applications. We have worked with a lot of students who have waited to the end to apply, maybe have had some problems with their application, have needed to resubmit, and then they're in a bind and they're going to miss the first few weeks of school, and they're in a panic. So, and having gone to university in Canada for 7 years, I know that the first week, especially in undergraduate, is one of the best weeks that you'll ever have. You'll meet some of the friends that you'll have for the rest of your life. So if you can avoid missing that week, I would do that. So as soon as you get your letter of acceptance, I would apply for the study permit. It usually takes anywhere from 5 to 8 weeks to process. So give yourself some time, and just in case anything happens, you've got extra time to reapply. And one thing to also keep in mind, in case there's not people just coming out of high school watching, there is no age limit for a study permit. So if you're you've completed your degree and maybe you've been working for a few years and you're thinking you might want to go back to a master's degree, you can actually apply at that point and you can get a study permit. So there's no limit on the age. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the program, Canadian University Dubai has a transfer program that allows you to start your studies here at the university and then transfer to one of the 17 partner universities in Canada. And this is an amazing program that many of our students have taken advantage of. So some of the universities that we have partnerships with include Queen's, Laurier, Ryerson, University of New Brunswick, McGill, University of Toronto, University of British Columbia. So some of the really big universities in Canada you can actually go and transfer to after studying here for a year or two. And I find that when I speak to parents, they really love this idea too, because it keeps their children close for maybe another year or two, allows them to get a bit older, get used to studying in university, also get used to studying in a Canadian environment before they then make the big move to Canada. So it's something to really consider if you are thinking about studying in Canada. Start at CUD and then transfer after a year or two here. So as I mentioned also at the beginning, we're going to have the Canadian University Dubai Open House on the 20th of June, 4 to 8 p.m. So please come, meet the professors, see the university. I'll be there to answer questions as well. So please put that in your calendars. Like us on Facebook so that you know about all of our events going forward. I'll be doing more updates about immigration and plus all these other programs we're planning at CUD. So that's it from me. I'm going to have a look now at the questions that are on our Facebook page and see what I can answer. Let's see. Oops. Okay, I don't see any on there. I think we're okay. I don't see any comments or questions here. I'll just ask my team if they have any on their side. Oh, there's some on the website? Sorry, hold on. I'll just have a look through here. Oh, I can't seem to scroll through. I don't see any. I think we might be having a technical difficulty here. I can't see the comments. So what we'll do is if you leave your comments here, we will get back to you and we will answer your questions. I can also do a follow-up session to let you know anything that comes up from these questions and answers. Okay, great. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been great, and I hope you can see our wonderful campus, and we'll see you again soon.